There is a moment from this weekend that nobody expected to become the moment. Not the pyrotechnics, not the ballad that made 40,000 people cry. Not even the fact that BTS was standing on the exact same field where they just performed in front of 1 billion people at the World Cup final. No. The moment everyone is still talking about is 4 seconds long. It happens in the middle of a 9-year-old song, and it exists specifically because the man who runs BTS's own company told them not to do it. If you have no idea what I'm talking about yet, stay with me, because by the end of this video you're going to understand exactly why one dance move at MetLife Stadium is being replayed, dissected, and defended online right now, and why it says more about Jimin than almost anything else he's done this year. Let's set the scene, because context is everything here. Saturday, August 1st, 2026. MetLife Stadium, East Rutherford, New Jersey. BTS steps out for night 1 of 2 sold-out shows as part of the ARIRANG World Tour, their first full concert on this stage since headlining the World Cup final halftime show less than 2 weeks earlier. That halftime show was historic. It put BTS on a bill with Madonna, Shakira, Coldplay, and Justin Bieber, performing in front of the biggest global sports audience on the planet. But it was short. A few minutes. A flex, not a full statement. Everybody watching that day walked away thinking the same thing. Imagine what they could do with 2.5 hours instead of 4 minutes. Well, 2 weeks later, they got their answer. Night 1 at MetLife wasn't just a concert. It was closer to a victory lap combined with a masterclass. Nearly every track from ARIRANG, the album that had already spent multiple weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200, made it into the set list, stitched together with fan-favorite throwbacks from across their whole career. RM opened with a level of intensity that had people talking before the night was even half over, delivering the group's signature intro to one of their most anthemic tracks with a kind of fire that felt personal, like he wasn't just performing the words, he meant them. The lines lean into resilience, into the idea of an underdog refusing to back down even when the odds say they should lose. That's not just an intro. On that particular night, in that particular stadium, it landed like a mission statement. But here's where the story gets interesting. Here's the part that turns a great concert recap into something worth stopping and clicking on. A little while before this tour, HYBE chairman and founder Bang Si-hyuk gave an interview to Billboard, and in it, he said something that surprised a lot of people. He said he had personally encouraged BTS to ease up on their choreography, less of the famously punishing, full-body, precision routines they're known for. Less of the intensity that's defined their live shows since the beginning. The reasoning makes sense on paper. These are men in their 30s now, most of them just coming off military service, doing back-to-back stadium shows across multiple continents for months on end. Even the most dedicated performers have limits. And the head of their own company, the man who built the empire around them, was essentially saying, "You don't have to go all out every single night anymore. You've earned the right to hold something back." So that's the setup. That's the instruction, straight from the top. Now here's what actually happened on that stage in New Jersey. The songs where BTS chose to keep the full, original, exhausting choreography. Those were the moments that hit hardest. Not the visually spectacular staging. Not the pyro. The choreography. And out of all of them, one performance is the one everyone keeps coming back to, the 2017 classic Mic Drop. They didn't tone it down. They didn't simplify it. They brought back the entire original routine, full formation, full intensity, exactly like it was almost a decade ago. And when the chorus hit the camera, and every phone in that stadium found Jimin standing dead center, leading the group through the choreography at full force, like the last 10 years hadn't happened, like there was never a conversation about easing up in the first place. 40,000 people lost their minds in that exact second. And if you've watched any of the clips circulating since Saturday night, you already know why. There's something almost defiant about watching someone choose the harder path when they've been handed permission to take the easier one. It's not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It's a choice. And when Jimin makes that choice, in front of that many people, on a stage that big, it reads as something close to a statement. This is still who I am. Now, I want to be careful here, because this channel is built on getting things right, not just getting clicks. Nobody has confirmed that this was some kind of dramatic act of defiance against HYBE. Bang Si-hyuk's comments were framed as care, not control. He wasn't laying down a rule. he was offering an out. What actually happened on that stage is BTS, as a group, and Jimin specifically in that moment, making the call that some songs deserve the full version regardless of what anyone recommended. That's the accurate version of this story. And honestly, it's a more interesting story than a fake conflict would be, because it says something real about who these performers are when nobody's forcing their hand either way. If this is the kind of breakdown you're here for, the real story behind the viral clip, not just the clip itself, this is exactly the kind of content this channel exists to make. So go ahead and hit subscribe now before we keep going, because there's a lot more from this MetLife weekend still to unpack. Let's talk about why this particular moment hits different when you know Jimin's track record, because mic drop wasn't a one-off. This is a pattern with him, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Go back less than a month to the World Cup final halftime show at this exact same stadium. Jimin didn't have much time on that stage. Nobody did. It was a shared bill with some of the biggest names in music, but in the few seconds he had, he still found a way to make it personal. During Pied Piper, he threw in a callback to his PS22 chorus dance collaboration, a tiny, specific detail that most of the stadium probably missed live, but that fans immediately caught and dissected online afterward. It wasn't necessary. Nobody would have noticed if he'd skipped it. He included it anyway. Or look at the jersey. During that same halftime show, BTS wore custom-numbered jerseys, and Jimin's number wasn't random. It was a direct tribute to Son Heung-min, the South Korean soccer star who'd become a symbol of national pride on the world stage. Again, small detail, completely optional, the kind of thing that takes effort to plan and coordinate for a 4-minute performance that most viewers would never think twice about. He did it anyway. Or think back to the charity auction just weeks before that, where a shirt Jimin actually wore on stage sold for $110,000. That's not a number that happens by accident. That's what happens when an artist's willingness to give everything of himself, literally down to the clothes on his back, translates into something collectors are willing to fight over. Every single one of these moments has the same DNA. Nobody required Jimin to do the extra thing. Nobody would have blinked if he'd taken the simpler, safer, more comfortable route. And every single time, he chooses the version that costs him more effort, more risk, more vulnerability, because that's apparently just how he operates. So when you put the mic drop moment in that context, it stops looking like an isolated viral clip and starts looking like exactly what you'd expect from him. Of course, he kept the full choreography. Of course, he ended up center stage leading it. That's not an exception to the pattern. That is the pattern. And I think that's actually the real reason this clip is spreading the way it is. It's not just that the dancing looked impressive, although it absolutely did. It's that people can feel the choice behind it. There's a difference between watching someone perform because they have to and watching someone perform because they refuse to give you anything less than everything, even when nobody would have blamed them for holding back. Audiences pick up on that difference instinctively, even if they can't always explain why a particular 4 seconds of footage is stuck in their head. Before we get further into night one, it's worth understanding just how long this particular road has been. The ARIRANG World Tour didn't start in New Jersey, and it didn't start in America at all. It kicked off months earlier in Goyang, South Korea, right after the ARIRANG album dropped and immediately became the group's comeback statement. From there it went to Busan, where fans organized entire citywide campaigns just to show support, subway trains wrapped in tour branding, a drone show lighting up the sky over Gwangali Beach. Then it crossed into Europe for a run that hit country after country BTS had never performed full stadium shows in before. Madrid, for the first time ever. Brussels, where that pause the concert moment happened. London's Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, where the reviews were near unanimous 5 stars and attendance numbers broke records. Munich, marking their first ever shows in Germany, complete with a genuine crossover moment with Bayern Munich. And Paris, where the French president himself showed up to watch, and where Jimin walked out in a custom Dior piece designed specifically for that stop by Jonathan Anderson. By the time this tour reached MetLife Stadium, in other words, it had already been tested across 2 continents and roughly half a dozen countries where the stakes, the language, the culture, and the crowd size were all completely different from show to show. And the choreography conversation with Bang Si-hyuk almost certainly wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was happening in the context of a tour that had already been demanding everything from these performers for months before they ever set foot in New Jersey. which again makes the choice to bring back the full mic drop routine on night one of the American leg even more notable. This wasn't early in the run when everyone still has fresh legs. This was deep into a global tour, in front of an audience that included people who'd waited years for BTS to perform a full American stadium show, and they still didn't hold back. Let's talk about the rest of the night too, because if you think mic drop was the only highlight of night one, you're missing a lot of what made this show special. The setlist itself was basically a love letter to the ARIRANG album, hitting nearly every track from the record that had already dominated the Billboard 200 for multiple weeks straight. That's not a small feat. Getting an album to debut at number 1 is one thing. Holding that position across several weeks, in the streaming era, against every other major release competing for attention, is a completely different level of staying power. And to then take that album and build an entire stadium show around it, with the energy and precision BTS brought that night, is the kind of thing that turns a commercial success into a genuine cultural moment. RM's performance deserves its own mention here too. There's a version of a stadium tour where the frontman just goes through the motions, especially this deep into a run of shows. That is not what happened Saturday night. When he delivered that same anthemic intro about refusing to lose, there was a rawness to it that read as completely unscripted, even though obviously it wasn't. It's the kind of performance choice that reminds you these aren't just entertainers hitting marks on a stage. They're still finding new things to say with material. Some of them have performed hundreds of times. And zooming out even further, this is genuinely one of the biggest live music weekends happening anywhere in the country right now. New Jersey Transit put out actual public warnings ahead of the shows, telling commuters to expect major crowding and long delays because of how many people were converging on East Rutherford for these 2 nights. Their trains can only move about 7,500 people an hour, and they were bracing for a crush. When your concert is generating transit authority warnings before it even starts, that tells you something about the scale we're talking about here. So if you're new to this channel, and you're wondering why an Indonesian-run BTS channel is going this deep into a New Jersey stadium show, this is what we do. We take the clip that's blowing up online, and we actually explain why it matters, with the real context behind it, not just recycled captions. If that's useful to you, subscribing genuinely helps more people find this kind of breakdown instead of the surface-level stuff that's everywhere else right now. Let's come back to the moment one more time, because I think it deserves a proper close. Picture it again. 40,000 people who have been on their feet for over 2 hours already. The band has already given them everything. The ballads, the throwbacks, the new tracks off an album that's been living in their headphones for months. And then the opening notes of mic drop hit, and there's a specific kind of roar that goes up in a crowd when they recognize a song they didn't know for certain was coming. Then the full formation drops in. Not a modified version, not a safer version. The real one, every count, every hit, exactly as demanding as it was in 2017. And there's Jimin, front and center, driving the chorus, moving like a man who was never given the option to ease up in the first place, even though he absolutely was. That's the image everyone's sharing right now. That's the 4 seconds. And once you know what came before it, the interview, the encouragement to hold back, the very real physical toll of a tour like this, you understand why it hit as hard as it did. It's not just good choreography. It's a small, specific piece of evidence about who Jimin is when he's given an easy way out and chooses not to take it. And honestly, once you start looking for this pattern in Jimin's year, it shows up almost everywhere, not just on stages. Go back to earlier this year, when he was walking Paris Fashion Week as Dior's global ambassador. Nobody requires an ambassador to bring genuine presence to every single appearance. Plenty of brand faces show up, pose and leave. That was never really his approach. Or look at the ARIRANG World Tour's European run, when the show stopped in Brussels and a fan in the crowd wasn't feeling well. Jimin paused the entire concert, thousands of people, a full production, everything mid-motion, just to make sure that one person was okay before continuing. That's not a scripted moment. Nobody writes that into a set list. It happens because somebody in that position decided the show could wait. Even something as small as a Galaxy Unpacked event earlier this year turned into a version of the same story, when a Jimin fancam ended up tied into Samsung's own product messaging. Not because a marketing team manufactured that connection out of nothing, but because there was already enough raw, organic footage of him giving 100% in ordinary moments that a phone camera captured something worth building a campaign around. You cannot manufacture that kind of material. It only exists because the effort was already there before anyone thought to point a camera at it. Which brings us back to New Jersey, and to a question worth sitting with for a second. What actually is the through line connecting a paused concert in Brussels, a tribute Jersey number at a World Cup halftime show, and a full-intensity dance break in an East Rutherford stadium that nobody would have blamed him for holding back on? It's not really about choreography at all when you strip it down. It's about a consistent refusal to give an audience anything less than the version of himself that took the most out of him to deliver. Some performers manage a long career by learning exactly how much they can hold back and still get away with it. Jimin's entire body of work this year looks like the opposite instinct, figuring out how much more he can give, even when the smart, sustainable, sensible move would be to hold something in reserve. That instinct has a cost, obviously. Bang Si-hyuk didn't bring up easing the choreography as some kind of arbitrary note. It came from a place of actually watching these men run themselves into the ground across a touring schedule that would break most performers half their age. There's a real tension in this story between an industry veteran trying to protect his artists from burning out and an artist whose entire identity seems to be built around not holding back, even when the people who care about him are telling him it's okay to. Neither side is wrong here. That's what makes it worth talking about instead of just another clip that trends for a day and disappears. It's also worth remembering this wasn't a one-time, career best behavior kind of night either. This is a group that just picked up a daesang, the top honor, for ARIRANG at Korea's KM Chart Awards, on top of the multi-week Billboard 200 run we already talked about. They walked into MetLife Stadium as, by almost any measure, the most successful act on the planet at this exact moment. And instead of treating a night like that as a lap of honor where you can afford to phone in the hardest parts, they treated it like there was still something left to prove. That's a choice too. Success at that level usually buys you permission to relax. They used it to do the opposite. If you're an ARMY who was in that stadium Saturday night, I want to know what it actually felt like in person when that formation dropped, because video never quite captures the sound a crowd makes in a moment like that. Drop it in the comments. And if you weren't there, tell me which part of the story surprised you most. Was it the HYB comment? The fact that they kept the full routine anyway? Or just how far Jimin's habit of going all in seems to extend into literally everything he does on a stage? There's still a second MetLife show on the calendar, plus the rest of his tour still ahead, and if history from this run is telling us anything, it's that BTS, and Jimin specifically, are not interested in coasting through the back half of a world tour just because they've technically earned the right to. So if you want to be here for whatever the next headline out of this tour turns out to be, this is exactly the channel for it. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss the breakdown when it happens, and I'll see you in the next one.